Thank you, Dan, for joining me. It's really a pleasure to have you. I know you are very busy with your full-time job, and also you are my go-to expert when it comes to anything WeChat related, especially anything that is also around social because of your background. So, for those of you who are not familiar with the background, can you give us an introduction?
Sure. So I'm Dan. I've been an engineer before, product manager, been around a bunch of companies in the Valley, spent a few years in China on the WeChat product team. I was just looking at my Facebook memories and I saw I had posted, I was at the 5th year anniversary and now this is the 10 year. And I didn't realize how long it had been, but I was there about 2014 to 2016 or so, and I've been back in the US, but like you, I still like to follow this stuff, see what's going on with Chinese tech. I used to write blog posts about some of the trends in product design and UI in China. I wrote a post a lot of people read about, why everyone was into chatbots here for a while and how things didn't quite work the way that people thought they did.
Your posts are very high quality. Yeah, so I'd really suggest you go to dangrover.com if you're interested in revisiting, maybe if you've already read it before, some of Dan's excellent posts, especially those comparing and contrasting the strengths and weaknesses of China tech. Now, I'm going to talk about WeChat. It's now used by almost 1.1 billion people daily, and that's, of course, primarily in mainland China. About 30% of these people, or 330 million, use video chat, actually. And I was really surprised to hear that stat. About 72% view their moments feed, effectively your private network that not everyone can see, but if you are friends with this person, you can see their moments. 11% post to moments. About a third read articles in WeChat through the public account program, which is very important actually to the whole channels product. Almost 40%. So about 400 million people use mini programs, which is also something really interesting. And we've definitely talked about it on Tech Buzz in detail. So you can revisit our episode on that if you're interested. And about 200 million people use the product that we're going to talk about in depth today, which is channels. That's almost 20% of WeChat's total daily users. Maybe you didn't know this product has been around for exactly 1 year, basically. On WeChat's 10th anniversary, Allen Zhang, who is the creator of WeChat, we're going to be quoting him and talking about him a lot today. So Alan gave us really good background on why WeChat decided to do channels, this video format. And that's because he noticed in the last 5 years, users are sending 33 times more video messages within the chat and 10 times more videos into their moments feed. Clearly, videos is a huge use case. Also, he notes that not everyone can write long form content, right? So the public accounts thing that we are talking about earlier, which by the way inspired Substack, is something that's for people who are really into writing content, and that's just not for everyone. But far more users can obviously shoot a short video. What happened was that in 2017 or so, when the team was looking at this and saying that, okay, we really need to add video into our product, they realized that it would require a whole new account system, since right now, the way it works is that within WeChat, you have your sort of private feed with your friends that you're connected with. So it's not just a pure follow function, versus the public account distribution system of content is really like a follow system, like on Twitter, for example. It's more broadcast oriented. The video product they were thinking of didn't quite fit into either of these systems. So they realized they really needed to create a whole new account system. And that was a lot of work. So they didn't really get around to it until 2019 or so. And video is really the next big thing. It was super obvious with the rise of ByteDance and Kuaishou, and they simply felt that they couldn't be avoided. Let me describe what is channels for those of you who are not on WeChat. Anyone with a WeChat ID can sign up for a channels account. Within channels, you can now create videos, short, long videos, and then you can also live stream if you're in China. So if you're abroad, you cannot quite live stream. Channels will then show up in your profile as a separate section. And then it'll also show up if you go to the Discover button, and then you can look up channels and look up video content there. When you do that and you go into the channels feed, you'll see that there are actually 3 separate feeds. You default to a feed called Friends, which means that you'll be seeing what your friends have been watching and have liked. You'll be able to see actually which one of your friends have liked each video, and you'll see how many have liked each video. And then in 8.0, they actually made it so that your like can be private if you want to. So I guess like I could like a video and then it will show up with my friends, I presume, but then actually they won't see that it was Ray that liked it. That's the default function. Then you can look at accounts you follow. And then there's this section called hot. I think it's basically a purely algorithmic machine learned content. So it just tries to figure out what you like to watch based on your preferences, but it does not have anything to do with what your friends have done or your explicit follows. Finally, also, live streaming, like I said, is a big part of channels. And what they did in actually starting past couple months, actually, is that you can now see who is live streaming near you. So WeChat has always had a people nearby function, and now that will default to basically people who are live streaming near you. I think the most important thing that everyone here, if you don't use WeChat, really have to understand is that WeChat actually doesn't really allow you to link to videos, just in general, content outside of the platform. They do, but it's not in a native format. It looks very different.
You can, but nobody would, right? Because like the way official accounts works, they give you an entire CMS. They host all this stuff for you. They add lots of interesting features like comments and being able to tip people. There's a lot of good reasons just to use all of the hosting built into the WeChat account system instead of trying to host a blog somewhere else and send out links using WeChat.
Yeah, I think one of the main strengths, which we'll talk about later with WeChat channels, is that it's native to WeChat. So it's easily shareable within WeChat. That's different from other content from other apps.
So for folks who don't know, like the workflow that you would use if you wanted to share a cool Douyin video on WeChat is you'd have to actually download it to your phone and then upload it into WeChat as if it was your video. So that's why they did the whole watermark where everything has the brand on it. If you want to share stuff with your friends, though, it's not a great user experience.
No, it's not. Yeah. And the last thing I wanted to add is that Alan wants to do all this and grow WeChat channels without using any money. He basically said we're not paying for content, and he's very dismissive of sort of growth hacking tactics that a lot of other Chinese
This is
companies
a
are
this is a consistent thread
exploring.
across a lot of their new products.
Yeah, so that's the recap. Now, Dan, let's talk about what happened. We both watched the WeChat Pro conference, which is their developer conference annual keynote. I know that we were chatting the entire time and I was finding it uninspiring, but then Alan gave
Yeah,
this speech and then I personally felt a lot better. What's your reaction?
Yeah, that was my reaction too. Watching the product development the past few years, I was starting to get a little skeptical of some of the stuff they were doing. A lot of it seemed very reactive and very much driven by sort of corporate strategy and not the typical thinking that we see from WeChat. Like they had their stories feature. We could talk about how they changed that. They have video feature. They have a Toutiao knockoff. They have a search section called Sowieso. And they just have all this crazy stuff they keep adding. And I was thinking as I was watching these presentations in the morning there, it was if you ever remember watching the classic like Apple keynotes where Steve Jobs would be out and then he'd say, and now we have the CEO from AT&T, and then they'd get the guy like reading index cards for 10 minutes and you're like, when can we get Steve back? It was like every presenter was like that guy for a whole day. And then it's okay, good. Finally, we can get Alan and we can hear what's going on. So it's interesting. They do it kind of in a reverse order, which I think is because it's a developer conference first and foremost. Like they're trying to talk to people in industry and show them the whole ecosystem and what they can do with WeChat. So it makes sense. It's just less exciting for us to watch sometimes.
What was something that Alan said that made you go, oh, wow, that's really insightful?
Yeah, so it was a good 2 hour talk at the end. So he spent a lot of time just setting up the story of why they started the channels feature, how they evolved it, what they learned. And I realized, okay, they've still got it. So there are a few interesting things for me. So one is like he had this insight that the kind of content they were showing people would affect the quality of the content that people would produce. I've developed a lot of products where you have this kind of growth goal and you're like, oh, we need more people watching. You would think you've got all these levers of let's get more people into the feature, let's get celebrities on there, Let's make our recommendations better. And he had the insight to say, maybe the content sucks, and maybe we just need better content. And how can we inspire people to produce better content? Which is, it's a hard thing to gauge, but I thought it was neat that he thought of that. There's also an interesting thread about how he made this prediction where he wrote it on a blackboard of ratio would be of stuff that you follow versus stuff that your friends like versus stuff that's recommended by the algorithm. And I think he expected there to be it was a 1 to 2 to 10 of those. And it actually ended up being completely not the case. And they ended up leaning in further to the sort of the social context. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Like they could have just gone totally balls to the wall on growth, and instead they're watching it, tinkering with it, seeing how people use it. Yeah, so I like that. It was because people just didn't have friends that were liking other videos, and from the stats you cited earlier, it's only 18% who are using channels. So if you're expecting that to be the driver, then obviously you're not going to see it until the feature has greater saturation.
So what Dan's basically referring to is that Alan said, remember I explained earlier, there are three separate feeds in your channels. You have what you follow, you have what your friends are watching, and then you have what's they call hot, but really it's just going to be machine recommended content. And he made the guess that the distribution of time spent on this content would be something to the ratio of 1 to 2 to 10. So for example, for every 10 minutes that you're watching content from people you already follow or accounts you already follow, you're probably going to watch double that from content that your friends have liked and therefore is being recommended to you. But you're going to be watching 10 times that for content that the machine recommends to you. His logic, by the way, for guessing this was he felt that what you follow and what your friends recommend to you are going to be high quality content because your friends are not going to want to like or recommend content that is very uninspiring or very common, very banal. Whereas the machine is going to have no problem recommending this content to you and it's going to be very brainless. And we're probably going to be spending a lot more time on brainless content, but the content where we're going to get the most value from is going to be from your follows and friends. So
This is kind of an interesting reversal too, because I remember watching the keynote they did, and what was it? It must have been 2017 when they first did mini programs, and he had this whole side rant about how they're never going to do any kind of ML in the product. This was before the video accounts came out.
it sounds like Alan has basically, he's not totally reversed, but he's become more nuanced, right, in the value of machine recommended content.
And as you said, it's not the default tab when you go in there as it is with Douyin. So this was back in 2017 when they were first releasing mini programs. And it was an interesting talk because it was this super hyped up thing, like everything had leaked before they actually announced it. And people were like, wow, this is just gonna totally change the ecosystem. It's gonna replace the App Store. It's gonna disintermediate Apple. It's gonna do all these things. So he had this his 2 hour talk. It was a lot of cooling water, pouring water on that sentiment a bit. And he was talking about some of the deliberate limitations of what they had designed at the time. Basically saying we're not going to have an app store. We're not going to be trying to recommend mini programs to people because we think that people will be naturally sharing them in context when it is like situationally appropriate. And he had some analogy about how if a friend tells you that something is a really good movie, that's way better than a recommendation algorithm. And he said something to the effect of people are a natural recommendation algorithm, which I think is pretty insightful. If you think about it, we have sort of purpose built circuitry in our brains for judging who to trust and which recommendations to look at. And it is actually hard for ML to beat that.
I really like that quote. That basically really leans into WeChat's whole like core asset, which is that this extremely large social graph, dense social graph that they've built that no one else has. It's proprietary and they obviously safeguard it very closely. Do you think what Alan has said, even though he is now acknowledging the value of machine recommendation, do you think the social graph, the defaulting to what your friends are watching, is really what's going to make WeChat channels successful?
I think there's validity to what he says, but let's say he's wrong, and let's say that by any metric, if you're trying to just look at raw time spent watching videos or raw enjoyment, let's say that social context isn't the way to get that, and actually ML can be better. Even if that's true, he has to talk his book, right? That is their advantage going into this, and it is precisely why when Douyin was coming out, they didn't have this advantage. Tencent had the social graph totally locked up, so of course they had to make a really good ML algorithm for recommending videos because they had no other way to drive engagement. I'm sure they wish they could have had your WeChat contacts in Douyin, but they didn't. So it's whether or not it's better. That is the path that they have to take. If they're going to win, that is how they have to win.
I totally agree with you. And of course, ByteDance has already tried to make social because machine learning, as great as it is, there are core advantages to having that social graph. Yeah, for me personally, like the friends thing, it is interesting because I am curious what my friends are watching. So even though a lot of my WeChat contacts are people I've met professionally, what they're watching is just really interesting to me because it helps me stay in touch with what this circle of Chinese venture investors or Chinese internet entrepreneurs, what are they doing? What are they talking about? It's like being on tech Twitter, right?
There is a risk, though, which is this whole, you've probably heard of the concept of context collapse, which we've all observed in the West, where some people will say they have just their close friends on Instagram or WhatsApp, but they have everybody they've ever met on Facebook. And so the stuff that they see in their news feed, it's every random person from their high school and everyone they've ever met. I have that problem a bit with WeChat. I have probably 1,000 contacts on WeChat, and never mind the fact that I don't live in China anymore. But I do think they reach a point where that becomes less of an advantage because they've done such a good job at making it this utility where you can add everyone in your life on it. I think every time a social network has tried to prevent context collapse, it never really works. WeChat tried to do lists, and Google Plus had their circles, and Facebook has something like that. But there is a danger of that starting to peter out at some point if they think that's what their advantage is.
Well, I'm already seeing it. I have my old Aggies, my real estate agents. They're also on my WeChat. Like anyone you ever like wanted to pay through WeChat Pay,
Yeah,
who wasn't a
I think I have
merchant.
my landlord
Yeah.
on there.
Yeah, exactly. So for me, a lot of the value of knowing who is watching this and therefore it's ending up in my recommendation stream is that then it's a really easy excuse to go talk to them.
The channels feature, it tells you these are videos that your friends have liked. WeChat is still, it is a communication app first and foremost. It is an excuse to go socialize with that person. And if you think about it, like regardless of the context, humans always need excuses to socialize, even though we're social beings, whether it's going to watch the game or it's not really about watching the game, seeing someone's status message or playing Fortnite or things like that. So I thought that's kind of neat.
Yeah, I think actually kind this happens to me where if I recommend an article, my friend liked it, he can actually thank me for it. Pretty much I only have one friend that does that though, so I don't know if that's like a often used function. Doesn't seem like it, but yeah, that is a way, yeah, to start a conversation.
This is a bit different from what folks are used to on Facebook and Twitter, where you have a single feed of everything and occasionally something will pop up in there because someone liked it. This is just a whole tab of stuff that your friends like, which is a neat experience.
Recently, I've been seeing in Chinese chatter, right? And this could be again because I am in these quote unquote internet circles of investors and entrepreneurs who unfortunately happen to skew slightly older male. And I've just been basically seeing all this chatter about how they feel that channels is attracting these quote unquote old uncles, 中年大叔, as both creators and viewers. Let's go into that slightly because I think this is potentially a place where WeChat channels could be different. I'm not really sure. On the creator
Yeah,
front, we have Douyin, right? ByteDance Douyin's algorithm, which basically rewards content that's very popular. And yes, it gives you a personalized feed, but what it's really good at, which has been covered a lot in Chinese media, maybe less obvious in English media, but I think now with TikTok, people get it. It's really good at identifying mass trend. So something that goes completely viral. TikTok slash Douyin is really good at that. WeChat, again, remember, doesn't default to this, defaults to your friend's feed. So there is a sense you have to be like really jumping on the viral trend of the moment to be seen in Douyin or TikTok, whereas perhaps a WeChat, because defaults to your friends, then maybe you can just rely on your existing social graph to share your content more. You don't really have to care about what's quote unquote really hot at the moment. There's a sense that's why I'm getting, again, in China, that the old uncles are like, oh, yay, we can also get an audience because our friends care about what we're doing or what we like. We don't have to compete with the cosplay girls with their anime filters. Yeah. So, what do you think of that? Yeah.
Yeah, I think there's some validity to that. I think the having this focus on your friends and the kind of stuff your people around you are looking at and maybe publishing, I think it makes the whole thing a lot more human scale. It seems to be better because their goal isn't to suck you in for the greatest amount of time on video alone. Their goal is to suck you in on the whole app and the whole ecosystem. And maybe that means talking to other people because you saw a video. Maybe that means joining more group chats. Maybe that means some synergies with the other features in the app. It makes sense to take whatever temporary hit they can take in terms of not trying to show the most engagement grabbing thing all the time as like the primary focus of the app if it means that the whole app is going to work better and that it stays true to the purpose of being a communication tool and a social network. It's completely antisocial. You can just sit alone for 10 hours and scroll through the thing and not talk to anybody. Like that's like the old David Foster Wallace quote. It's something like that.
No, it's so true. It's so funny when people like say TikTok is a social media, and I'm like, what's really that social about it,
Right.
right?
I mean, which is all fine and good, but there's already an app for that. So like
Right.
they have to do something different, right? About the all the IEs and stuff. I have less experience with that these days. I have my wife's folks and my landlord and a
Mhm.
few other older folks on there. From my limited experience, it seems like old people use WeChat the same people that old people use Facebook in the US. It's eerily like identical behavior. I have gotten a lot of videos, so anytime it's a holiday, I'll get some Merry Christmas video, like the old e-cards. I see a lot of those forwarded. There's a lot of like stuff people share on friend feed. I think the term for it in Chinese is jitang, like a lot of chicken soup, just like utterly banal cliche stuff. So it's the exact same stuff that older folks in my life share on Facebook. It wouldn't surprise me if the video section is a lot of the kind of videos that they're already sharing.
Again, I don't have any inside data, unfortunately. So it's not like this is completely a data driven comment. Just anecdotally, my friends and family, just older people, they're actually, I would call them super sharers, right? They just like share a ton of content. It's all this like very mishmash, like content that has nothing to do with whatever is hot or trendy at the moment.
Be a danger for the product because if you think about it, they're not sharing content they created. They're not sharing their opinion. They're not sharing commentary. They're just forwarding on this like cliche stuff, right?
Yeah. Maybe like the chatter I'm hearing is really like the chatter I was referring to earlier, like these old uncles saying, oh my God, I'm excited to create on WeChat channels. That's still a pretty small segment. I, for
Yeah.
example, can see my parents maybe consuming that type of content, but I can't really see them creating it. So there is that dichotomy. The creators are probably still going to be, relatively speaking, like younger people.
I could see people doing vlogs and things like that.
I'll just play devil's advocate here. The thing that a lot of people have been saying is that, hey, everyone, not just in China, of course, but like definitely in China as well as the US, everyone's going after Gen Z. Everyone's like, what's going on with Gen Z? What do they want? And we're building for them. But WeChat, because it's a 1.1 billion user channel with a lot of friends and family and older people on it, then I guess the unique opportunity where they can definitely build for like slightly older population at scale. And by the way, those older people, I'm one of them. Older people in China, by the way, is just 40 and above. So it's not like that old.
Yeah, and I think like that doesn't get enough appreciation and praise because if you think about it, there's hundreds of millions of people where that is their first time, probably their first computer, their first time being on the internet, and they've made it all simple enough to work well for them.
I think WeChat for sure has a monopoly on that population. Earlier, Dan, you had a really good point about how WeChat's channels, WeChat is this like incredibly honestly, Allen calls it simple, but really it's a very complex app. It's a whole
It's getting more
ecosystem.
complicated than it used to be. Yeah.
So it doesn't have to be like ByteDance's Douyin, like you said. It doesn't have to win by just keeping you watching videos, right? It can do all these other things. It can make money off of you, or at least benefit from your presence in all these other ways. And do you see channels as being a really powerful standalone thing? Because people, when they compare it to Douyin, that's really the question they're asking. In my opinion, it's really more of this additional thing that makes the entire ecosystem stronger. What do you think of that? Being an integrated platform.
It's a reasonable enough argument just to say that, hey, we missed the boat on video. More and more content is going to be video. We need to experiment with video features in the app until we get it right, which I think is what they're doing. I don't think they have to be Douyin, nor do they have to be, Netflix. They don't have to be anything.
Do you think the integration, I guess this integrated vision, do you think it's an asset or actually a liability? Because some people are arguing that the pure play Douyin is going to do better with video.
I think it's easier for WeChat to do video than it is for ByteDance to build out the whole ecosystem of other stuff that Tencent has done. I think it's very hard to go the other way around.
It sounds like what you're saying, especially with your comments earlier, is that this is a little bit of a defensive move, but it's pretty easy for WeChat to defend because of all these moats that they built previously with mini programs, with, of course, the communication app. And then, yeah, of course, they have a really dominant payments
Yeah,
app.
I think so. I think the angle that I'd be curious to analyze it from is if you think about it, like going back to 2013, 2014, that time, there wasn't anything really competing with official accounts. It's like for folks in the US who remember Google Reader, it's like this alternate universe where Google Reader really took off and everybody had it on their phones and people were telling you to add your feed to Google Reader. And they had this advantage of just being the place where a lot of content was consumed just because there wasn't any other good way to publish to people like that where they'd actually read it. And then ByteDance came around with Toutiao, and then they came around with video. So they're catching up on both of those fronts. They had this, despite all the other things they had accomplished with just being a good social network and a good communication platform, they had this advantage of just being a good place to go to consume content. I don't know how integral that ends up being to all the other parts of the what they call the lifestyle, right?
Wait, when you say they, you meant WeChat or ByteDance?
WeChat.
You're saying that people probably forget that WeChat's already built this whole content ecosystem already.
Yeah.
So you're saying that after WeChat launched public accounts and got all this traction off of it, Toutiao was actually coming in and trying to take it away by not having the social network. So therefore they had to do the whole recommendation thing. And then they
Mhm.
applied that to video. And now WeChat is like, oh, hey, we built that whole text content that was really successful. 360 million people still open it daily. I am one of them, very loyal. So after Douyin's success, we're going to apply our same product logic and leverage a lot of the same core assets, same core advantages like the social network and apply it to video. Even the names of these products sound very similar, right? Channels
Mhm.
is 视频号 and public accounts is 公众号. Maybe a comment here would be the WeChat products are even named very clearly to be focused on the creator, whereas Douyin, TikTok, etc., at least when you think about it, it's highly focused on the content. Um,
And I think that is still the experience they're trying to preserve. Like the way that Gong Hao worked in contrast to was it's not trying to be this thing where it just like shovels content down your gullet for as long as it can. It's something that is used as a tool. It works deterministically. You go out and subscribe to things that you want to follow and you go back there because you know what you're going to get, which is very different from Toutiao and Douyin. So they're trying to do more with ML, but they're still trying to preserve that like this nature of being a tool and working in a predictable way.
do you think like maybe the final winner is actually somewhere in the middle, like a hybrid, like what channels is trying to do now versus public accounts is deterministic and follower based, not algorithmic? Do you think that's the hybrid model is actually what's going to win?
I'm not sure. I guess like we have to define like winning at what, right?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, even Alan has already acknowledged that machine content, because when it serves you up this brainless entertainment content, you're more likely to be spending time on it.
Yeah, like Alan, I have this uneasy attitude towards ML and ranking. It's like the MSG of product design, where you can always improve something by having better suggestions. Like you can see the same patterns being used in every app, where if you add an account, let's suggest more accounts you can add. If you join a group, let's suggest more groups you can join. If you add a friend, let's suggest more friends you can. So you can apply ML and try to heighten the engagement in any feature just by getting people to do more of the things that you've seen them do. And that will improve any product's metrics. But the question is that worthwhile in the long run? Does it actually make these products better? I don't know.
Yeah.
Right? Like it'd be dumb to not be doing it if you're trying to compete with ByteDance. Of course, you have to try something with that.
What do you think is the biggest downside of that?
I
That's
don't think we understand the downsides as a society. And I think what Alan seems to get from what we saw in the talk is that these social networks are complex systems where any little change you make in the UI has not only like the direct effect on whatever metric it is or how people use the feature, but the sort of second order and third order effects when you get to the quality of the content created. And I think there's a case, like from what we've seen in the US, where like people joining some of these conspiracy groups and getting all sorts of weird ideas. Maybe there's some butterfly effect where some of the things that all the product managers along the line changed to make their features better, like somehow led 15 steps later to storming the Capitol. I don't think we have a concrete way to think about it because it is such a complex and unpredictable system.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It goes back to the point that you said much earlier, which is that the way you set up the system, right? Whether whatever tweaks you do to the algorithm, or it's a hybrid friends recommendation plus machine, it will actually drive different content creation, which will then in
Right.
turn drive different content consumption.
Because that's in our nature too, is we mimic
Yeah.
what we see other people doing, right?
So it's like this whole cascading effect, and you can't like disentangle the creation from the consumption, basically. At least he has the awareness. I'm not sure he has the answer either.
And like people always have, there's kind of two ways you can reason through these things. You can either do it from a purely objective metrics point of view, or you can do it from the sort of intuitive, sort of creative line. And I think both of those are are crappy at confronting this kind of question.
Wait, isn't Alan more of the latter, where he's a little bit more intuitive?
I think so, but I think so, and I think that's helping them. But I think like software is getting so complex and so intertwined in so many ways with every aspect of our society that it is hard to predict intuitive. Like a good example is something like read receipts in a chat app,
Oh, mhm.
right? Like you could either say we're gonna test it and see if it improves responsiveness or improves message sends, or you could do what they did at the time, which is to reason through it intuitively and say, I don't think read receipts are a good idea because it's infringing on the privacy of the recipient, and we think that the privacy of the recipient is more important than the sender having this convenience of knowing their message has been read, which is a fine and good way to reason through it. But then you have to consider maybe in environments where people have five different messaging apps, like in the US or some of these other countries they're trying to grow it into. That's actually a big downside to using the app is if you don't know what messaging apps your friend checks, then you probably would like to have that read receipt. And it's actually going to make the product not do as well and not be as useful for the people who are on it. So I think there's times in making product decisions where you can get so wrapped up in the metrics that you don't have that kind of empathy and you can't predict it. But then empathy also has limits too, because like you can't really. It's very hard to when you have a product that's a billion users. I can empathize with people who are like me or in my cultural background. It's very hard to empathize with someone all the way across the country from a completely different walk of life. So anyway, this is a whole other tangent, but
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean,
I think
but
it's getting harder to make good product decisions at scale in tech companies in general, whether that's in the U.S. or China.
mhm. And Alan's like sort of reliance on intuition could be seen as a strength when it's the right strength, when it's the right thing to do, and you're one of the users that he understands well, but maybe
Right.
you're not one of them, and then it
Right.
feels very like uncomfortable. I think this happens with any billion user plus app, but basically when WeChat 8.0 came out, there's like a lot of gripes
I saw
relating
some
to it.
pretty snarky stuff from some of my Chinese friends that I didn't quite have the time to understand it. I didn't quite understand where it was coming from. I'll say it that way.
Okay. But anyways, so I do want to ask, we've talked so much about channels and I think some of the product philosophies, and it's just really hard to have a very clear cut answer if which way of thinking about algorithms or content or whatever works. But what do you think? Maybe here's an easier question. What do you think are the biggest risks to channels right now? Could be anything. For example, I think some of their biggest risks is WeChat has never really made a product where they're going to have a lot of, in my opinion, if they're going to have live streaming, they're going to need a lot of staff doing moderating.
That was, I think, one of the reasons they kept Gongchen so locked down. Like, if to get an account, like you have to, in some cases, if you're a company, you have to send them your registration and you have to give them your Shenfen card. You have to do all this paperwork to be able to get an account. And I always thought that was like a government mandated thing, but or just a thing to minimize their compliance risk. But then it seemed a bunch of companies came around and made it very easy to publish and didn't have so much rigmarole to get started. And then they were left in this position where they were trying to be very conservative and not run afoul of those risks. And now everyone else is just running circles around them in terms of democratizing people publishing, right?
Yeah, so I consider that one of the big risks. How are they going to do trust and safety with everyone, 1.1 billion people now able to open up a channel's profile, like
Yeah, although I
whenever
guess
they
like
want?
ByteDance has demonstrated that can be scaled, and I guess not run afoul of the relevant regulations. I don't know how they're doing it, but I guess if ByteDance can do it, then Tencent can do it.
With a really large trust and safety team, which I think
Yeah,
runs counter to what Allen says. I think the maybe this is a good time to talk about his bias against operations, right? Strictly speaking, operations is Yunying, which doesn't really include trust and safety per se. It's really more about user growth and user retention and a lot of the very manual methods, or at least capital intensive methods that Chinese companies often use. And I think Allen in his speech was very pointedly dismissive of these methods because he felt that the product should be able to live on its own merits. Do you think that kind of bias, though, especially in today's very competitive China tech market, or even, or like that kind of purist thinking?
I think it's a little black and white. Like I think I do see in my line of work, I see teams make this mistake all the time where whatever it is you're launching, maybe you're launching a new developer platform or a new content publishing thing or whatever new feature it is in your app. Like the first tendency of a lot of people will be to sign some exclusive partnerships and build some like one-off things with them and try to bootstrap it somehow. And what that does is it blinds you thinking about what are the fundamental mechanics and value proposition of the thing I'm making, and can it eventually stand on its own legs? So I don't think it's right to say, oh, we're never going to do any of that stuff, and it's always a crutch. But it does mean you have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time, and it can be very hard for a lot of teams to balance these kind of one-off growth efforts and partnerships with like just being very rigorous about the fundamental mechanics of whatever feature they're trying to launch.
Yeah, like maybe what Alan will end up saying in a few years is that, oh, operations is not so bad, just like how he's come around to machine learning a little bit more. Maybe it'll be, yeah, more of a hybrid approach to many things. I do think it's a little absolute. It sounds great as an ideal, right? Oh, I'm a product genius and therefore the product should really drive. It's not even it's a product genius, but like the product should drive everything. It's a little, maybe it's a little bit of a wishful thinking at this point.
Getting back to like how do you police the content now that you're opening it up to so many people, there is this like fundamental trade-off between the high operational costs of doing something like that and your ability to directly monetize the content. On Facebook and on Toutiao and on Douyin, it's very simple. The whole thing is just this big old feed of content, and like you can just police that stuff pretty linearly, and you can monetize it pretty linearly in that you're just one in every five pieces of content you show an ad. And WeChat has been a lot slower with that and a lot more thoughtful in the way that they monetize. If it is that important for them to start opening up video and getting more content produced by people and more stuff being shared, and if that carries a cost in terms of policing it, then you could start to see the screws tighten a bit on monetization
Mhm. A monetization of the what do you mean?
of the
Can you
whole app.
explain that? Of the whole app?
Well,
Okay.
because they've been pretty conservative, right? Like they've started to have the ads in pengyouquan, but not very many. They do a lot of very indirect things, like they make a little off of payments, and they have their whole payments business,
Mhm.
selling financial services. They have their games business, but I don't think they could at this point make. I haven't seen the latest financial returns, so maybe this has changed a lot. But I think it's a lot harder for it to stand on its own as a independently profitable product for them.
Mhm. Yeah,
And I
I
think
have
that
no idea.
that could start to change.
Mhm. Yeah, it does seem. I mean, Alan's whole philosophy is really about not bothering the user that much. Do you think that's really
Mhm.
compatible with the channel's product? I guess the way he's doing it is it's still relatively indirect in the sense that it's not like you open up the app and it's just like pinging you with a bunch of content and recommendations. You do have to go tap into it, or you're shared the content from friends. So maybe it's either just like trying to shift responsibility of the recommendation off of the app itself and just onto the shoulders of your friends. So if you have really annoying, spammy friends, then you'll have a bad experience.
Yeah, I think that'll work out well for them. I think they've still been relatively restrained. Like they're not trying to do growthy things for you to go check out the feature. They do put the red dot on it when there's some new content, but other than that, it's pretty restrained. And I think that approach can work because it's worked so well for Pangyo-chan and some of the other features. Like they never needed to do that stuff.
Yeah, it really still just goes back to the fact that WeChat is a 1.1 billion user app that everyone opens basically every day. And there are so many messages flying through the system, so many opportunities for content to be shared. I don't think anyone else could get away with this kind of design. Would you agree?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
because
think
it's
so.
like WeChat really has been very restrained about forcing you to use a product. It's more saying, hey guys, there's this new thing. It's here. Use it if you want. We'll make it really easy for you to use it. But if you don't want to use it, that's okay.
And in a lot of other companies, there would be this pressure on every one of those product teams where they go, "Oh no, not enough people are using videos. Like, how do we?" And instead of seeing that as a byproduct, as just a thing to observe, where it's, oh, maybe the feature's not very good and that's why people aren't using it. A lot of teams and companies would say, all right, we need to fix that. We need to start sending notifications. We need to. So they tend to take this sort of laid back approach where they're not trying to juice every metric for every feature. There's looking at that as the byproduct of the efforts and figuring out, okay, only a third of people use mini programs. I guess we have more stuff we can do.
Yeah. And
Guess we can
again,
make it
yeah.
better.
Yeah. Again, I know that's only like only WeChat can do that because of how strong they are. Do you think that they are that strong? Do you think WeChat's strength they're able to retain and how do I say this? Do you think WeChat's like long-term competitive advantage is actually this restraint?
I think it has been. I don't know if it will continue to be. Like, I think what they realized, I think before things got totally crazy in our industry around that stuff, was that every one of these A/B tests that shows some great result on how many more users you can activate has these kind of externalities that you could never measure in the test around things like trust and how annoyed people feel with those kinds of things and what sort of muscle memory people are developing using the app. So there's a lot of these kind of intangible, sort of squishy things that are very hard to deliberately optimize for. And I think they've been good at keeping this sense of trust and control and sort of psychological safety when using the product that maybe you get a little less of with some other products that are constantly trying to grow every feature. They also have been protected to some degree from competition, and so maybe it is a luxury, maybe it isn't. I don't know. It's nice to say that when you're already on top. You can go and give these 2 hour keynotes about how tasteful and restrained you are. It's hard when you're not on top to do that, right? But I think you still have to hand it to them. Like they had the courage to be that way from the very beginning. There's a great old talk when I forget which year it was when Alan was talking about when they were version 1.0 or 2.0 or something, when they were trying to decide how are we going to integrate with QQ. And they could have just built a feature where it just imports your whole QQ contact list, and all of a sudden you have 100 friends, and every metric would have shot through the roof in 2011 or 2012, and then it would have petered out, and it never would have gotten to the extent that it has. So I think saying that now and saying, oh, we have our way of doing things, sure, that's you're born on third and think you hit a triple. But they did have that restraint and that courage early on. I think they still deserve the credit there.
I do think that's the thing I respect the most about Alan is that he has been, as far as I can tell, I don't know him personally, and I've only been observing from afar. He has been fairly consistent in his beliefs. He's been very stubborn. Of course, like some people think that he's a dinosaur and maybe he should change some of his beliefs and get with the times. But I really respect how strongly continues to hold on to them. We've seen some movement with this 8.0, and especially earlier, we talked about his more openness towards algorithms. But I think for the most part, he really is the same product manager that I was listening to like 10 years ago.
Yeah, it's very unusual in our industry. It's as if like Facebook acquired Kevin Systrom before he created Instagram. Like that kind of thing never happens, right?
Oh, yeah. Oh, you were talking about how Alan ended up. You're talking
Yeah,
about
so
how Alan
I mean,
ended up at Tencent.
so there's not a lot of people in his position. He could retire tomorrow if he wanted to, right?
So I think we've talked a lot about channels, but I want to get a little bit of your thoughts on just the 8.0 upgrade in general. Or were you excited by it? What's your sort of general feedback?
Yeah, so I think they had a good collection of good additions to the feature lineup. So obviously the focus this year was on the channels. They also have a new status feature. There's been some evolution on mini programs. They've changed the way that you can have a picture in picture mode.
What do you think of statuses actually? So, for those of you who don't know, basically now you can set a status, which is like they have these default categories, which a lot of people are making fun of because slacking is a category, but the icon was someone sitting on a toilet. But so you basically start off with I think 10 or 12 categories. You can then input your own status with words, with a photo, with a location, etc. And then you can click on it. You can see who else in your friend circle is sharing the same status. So if you, for example, picked insomnia as your status, you can click on it and then see who else in your friend circle is also suffering from insomnia. But is this also replacing the stories thing? It's no
Yeah, and
longer.
they talked about that a bit in the keynote. So I think he said what were they calling it, time capsules last year
Right,
when they
time
launched that.
capsules.
They
Yeah.
had this kind of back when everybody was adding stories to their product. They had this kind of bolted on stories feature where you can shoot a little video and it shows up next to your on your profile screen, and you could see in chats if people had a video status. And I think he said that only about 1 million people were using it. So it's basically a flop. So I think they're trying to figure out what else can we do for that. And I think the intention is let's make it more lightweight for people to share. If your impulse is to share something that's going on in your day, how many choices do you have for that? You could message a group chat. You could post it in pengyouquan. You could post a video about it in your channel, or you could use this feature. So there's already a lot of ways you can share in the app. So I was trying to like, why do they need one more? But if you think about it, like Chen, at least a lot of the content that I've seen on there, it's a lot of like polish and like very performative kind of stuff. So I understand why they would want to lower people's inhibitions and make it a little more casual. I think the design of the feature is neat. I like all it reminds me of something that like Path would have shipped in like 2011 or something. I like all they have the little icons. You can upload a picture, and they have a button that's unique to this feature to blur the picture that you upload, which I thought was an interesting choice. I haven't seen a lot of my contacts using it, and it still seems a bit like bolted on and disjoint from pengyouquan. Like I would probably want to see more of that stuff in other areas of the app. So I haven't quite figured out how does this square with the rest of the app, but it does seem like a better attempt than last year.
Yeah, I agree with you. I like the idea as well. If you're messaging someone and they have a status that's active, you can click through and see what their status says because it'll show up right next to their name. So maybe it is meant for only sort of people you're actively engaged with.
They have it full circle because if you think about it, back when we were transitioning from like the desktop messaging apps, like one of the big changes that WeChat and all the other messaging apps made on that were mobile first was we're not going to have status. Like you're not going to have online and offline and away and do not disturb because you always have your phone. It's always with you. So it is funny that we've gone full circle back to AIM and QQ and things like that.
I know that's actually pretty hilarious. I wonder how many of our listeners actually know what AIM is. But anyway, uh, yeah, okay, let's do a wrap up. Let's do a wrap up and predictions. So just this is just like purely summarizing all the things that we talked about today and specifically regarding channels. So let's talk about what you think will be the ultimate outcome. I'll give my take as well. What happens in 5 years? Oh, okay, wait, too long. 2 years. We'll probably already have a really good idea because we're talking about WeChat, the app that basically runs like the internet in China. So in 2 years, what do you think is going to happen? Do you think channels is going to die off like the time capsules function that we are talking about earlier? Any chance of that happening? Or do you think it's going to survive and thrive more like mini apps?
It would surprise me. It's only at 18% now, so it wouldn't surprise me if that grew to at least surpass what's happened with official accounts.
What
I think it'll do just fine as a feature. I don't know if you were to look at raw time spent or any other metric. I don't know that it would go head to head with Douyin.
Got it. Okay, so unsure whether or not it will beat Douyin on pure video, but you think usage will probably be comparable
I think so.
to public
In terms of just
public.
I think in terms of just being another draw to keep people in the app and connecting with their friends, I think it'll do fine.
Okay, that's fair. I actually agree with you. I think that it will. Yeah, I guess my
You'll,
question
you'll
didn't even
notice though
include.
in the
Yes.
stat that they released, though, they told you what percent post to moments. So they
Hmm.
said 11% post to moments. What do you think it's going to be for channels? I don't think it'll ever get to 11% for channels.
That's a really good point.
What does that mean for their content ecosystem and the flywheel that they're building there? I don't know. What's your
Yeah.
prediction?
So I just looked up Douyin, right? Douyin has 600 million daily actives and about 22 million creators, something like that. The
Mm,
time frame is not exactly the same. So maybe 3%. That sounds actually pretty reasonable.
yeah.
So I agree with you. Yeah, if over 100 million people are posting to moments, which is a really like low friction and low pressure thing because it's to your private network, then I would guess a much smaller portion of that
Yeah, but it doesn't have
would
to either
be.
because moments is still going to be there, and you have statuses, and you have all these other ways to share.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So yeah, I would guess less than 5% of the people who are using channels are actually going to be creators. That makes sense and seems comparable to other platforms. Okay. Oh, I guess we already answered what kind of DAU are we going to see. So, well, let's ask you the question explicitly. Do you think the DAU is going to be greater than mini programs in 2 years? We're talking about viewers. We're not talking about creators, obviously. So,
So I have a theory on mini programs that I don't
mhm,
know if it's accurate,
mhm,
but I think a big part of that 37% or the 400 million, I don't think it's like the stuff that we always see in the keynotes where it's like O2O stuff and actual apps. I think a lot of mini programs that people are using are content mini programs. And I
mhm.
think mini programs is cannibalizing from Gongzhonghao and probably will from video counts. So it wouldn't surprise me if a lot of mini programs out there that are just doing video, that are just replicating channels. So it
So,
could be that channel. It could be that both of them go up and Gong Junhao goes down. I don't know. Like
well,
they're all, to a certain extent they're bleeding into each other and they're doing some of the same jobs.
Got it. Yeah. And we already talked about on TechBuzz how actually WeChat mini programs is going to allow live streaming directly from the mini
Mhm.
program. I guess the whole direction WeChat is going in is that you can just live stream and video from every which way inside of WeChat.
Yeah,
So
I think
maybe,
they're trying to see what
yeah.
sticks.
Yeah, and so maybe as you again, as you said earlier, it's this more integrated vision that they have, and it's less about does channels itself do really well, but does it add strength to the whole ecosystem? And right now, it seems like we're saying yes. What kind of content do you think will be ultimately thriving on channels for pre-recorded asynchronous video? Do you think that'll be longer videos, or do you think it'll be like Douyin, TikTok, really short and memey stuff?
I think it will be longer videos. If you look at the interface now, it's not really very well optimized to the sort of like channel flipping that you do on Douyin. Like I think they're trying to get you to discover and subscribe to creators, like people where you actually watch, everything they have to say, and you want to. So I think it's going to be longer form content, but I'm not sure.
I think I agree with you. Again, it's an intuition thing. I don't have any data to back it up whatsoever, but it feels, especially with my belief that older people are going to want to see this content, it's probably going to be slightly longer. And also, it's just like a really good opportunity, right? Because that's a area where I guess you have Bilibili and Nishigwa also trying. ByteDance hasn't really quite cracked it, and Bilibili is still not nearly as big of a audience as WeChat has. What do you think is going to be the demographic that WeChat channels will be most popular with?
Oh, I couldn't say. I'm so out of touch with that side of things now. I
Well,
haven't lived in China for 5 years now. I think it is gonna be a broader demographic than any of these other apps for sure, because that's where they are,
yeah, exactly. They're just like they have everyone.
for
Okay,
better or worse, right?
yeah. So I'm gonna say that it's gonna skew older. How do you think people will create on it? Do you think there'll be mostly creators who are only using channels as their main source of creation, just like how on Douyin people are like dedicated to that one format, or do you think it'll be more like content creators who are already using public accounts and mini programs and whatever, doing maybe selling through their
I,
emotes,
I
and
think
those are
it's
the
there's
people
going to
that
be a
they
lot of
use?
people. Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of people using all of these. And I think Alan even mentioned in the talk he had something in the early vision about maybe having a mini program running underneath the video. We already saw that to some degree where people would launch a mini program and then they would use the mini program to get you to subscribe to the official account to get marketing messages, right? So it wouldn't surprise me if creators and businesses use all of these surfaces in every possible way to get traffic. So I think it is neat to think of. We're very used to the idea on things like Taobao and the e-commerce sites. There are these live streams where they're doing like QVC style things, or you can buy stuff in the stream. So it wouldn't surprise me if there's a bunch of experimentation with people doing live streams and pre-recorded videos where there's some kind of interaction with the video that can be done through mini program. Whether it's buying something or voting on something or playing a game or something like that. I think we'll see some experimentation.
Yeah, I think it was in the gaming thing where they said that they were going to give a lot more personalization in the mini programs. Basically, WeChat is has all these components, and that's both a pro and a con. It's very complex for people to navigate, but if you are really serious, then there's so many tools you can use, even for individual creators. And I might be the sort of outlier here, but I agree with this one venture capitalist in Silicon Valley called Hunter Walk at Homebrew, and he basically
Mhm.
said that he believes creators are going to be multi-skew instead of just newsletters or just whatever. So as you can see, I'm already doing that. I have a podcast, like newsletter. I'm trying to do forums, and I will randomly pop in on Clubhouse and do these YouTube videos as well. So I really believe in more of a multi-skew approach. Of course, what I'm missing is that I don't have a WeChat like platform where I can integrate all of this. So I would love to see someone build that. Whereas right now I'm in a lot of these disparate places. I really envy actually the creators in China.
If they had this insight a few years earlier, they wouldn't have had to make a whole separate video account. They would just have some like really good video experience in Guangzhou. Like maybe you have a video tab instead of that. So it is going to be weird because a lot of these creators are going to want you to keep coming back and get your continuous attention. They're probably going to publish videos both on the Shupinhao and the Gongzhenghao, right?
Yeah. Yeah. WeChat will make the rules not spammy, but that doesn't prevent you from being spammed by your friends if or whoever you follow. So you are if you are unfortunately following a lot of really spammy accounts, then you will be
Right,
spammed.
that's on you.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Unsubscribe, right? Unsubscribe.
yeah.
So, okay, cool. Oh, one
All
final
right.
question I do wait, one final
Oh,
question I do want to ask just because everyone's going to ask this question and I already polled people on this. I know that we're talking about WeChat channels as part of an integrated product, and I actually think that's the right way to look at it. I don't think we should be comparing it to Douyin like in
yeah, I
as
agree. It's
individual
apples
product.
to oranges.
But if if you had to pick just short video as a singular product, let's call it user generated video as a singular product, who do you think will win in 5 years?
So I guess we have to define the criteria of winning. Is it most screen
winning,
time? Is it
winning.
most content creators? Like,
Let's call it. Let's just make it easy and say it's time spent.
boy, I think it's going to be really close because I think I forget what the stats were from Douyin and TikTok, but I remember it being pretty impressive what they're able to get.
It's 80
So yeah, I
plus
think
80 90 minutes per day. Yeah.
yeah, so I think that's going to be really close to call. I don't think WeChat necessarily loses if some of the video consumption time leaks out to other apps, but it wouldn't surprise me if they're neck in the next year or two.
Wait, you think that WeChat channels in particular, or you mean WeChat
Oh no, no,
video?
I think channels. I think channels is always going to be below in terms of time spent. Not only because Douyin has this. You think about the interaction, right? Douyin, you go in the app and you just consume video for 20, 30 minutes. WeChat, your friends are messaging you, you're going in and out. It's cannibalized by all the other WeChat features that do video. I don't think channels, in terms of pure time to watch videos, I don't think that will surpass Douyin. I think WeChat as a whole will be ahead of them. Like I don't think we'll see that declining rapidly,
Got it. Got it. Yeah.
even if Douyin beats them on video.
That's probably clear in Alan's head, but I feel like for a lot of other people looking at it, they're really trying to look at channels and as directly competitive with Douyin. The better question might be to ask if ByteDance is going to build up a complete ecosystem, is that going to be competitive with WeChat? We
I
won't.
don't think it's ever going to happen. I don't think they can do it. I don't think it's in their DNA. Like
You don't think it's
the time for them to start building an ecosystem would have been like 5 years ago when they were launching all the news and joke apps. I think it's going to be really hard for them. It's not something you can do overnight.
as someone who's spent more time actually studying ByteDance than Tencent or WeChat, I actually agree with you. I don't think that is how the company thinks about it. Yeah, it's not
And I think
building
like
a. Mhm.
with something like payments, like they're going to have the same challenge as Facebook, where if ByteDance does payments, it's going to be to support the rest of the app and to support e-commerce and to support create. It's not going to be its own freestanding payments business like Ali and Tencent have tried to do. So
Mhm.
it's a lot harder to do it in that way.
Mhm. Cool. All right. Awesome. I have taken up too much of your time. So thank you for doing this on a
All right,
Saturday night. And whenever is the next big news about WeChat or anything social, we'll have to talk again. So,
sounds good.
okay. Thanks, Dan.
Bye.
Okay. Bye.